Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, SmartStart Sheets. My name is Anna and I'm a product marketing manager here at Smartsheet. Now the topic of today's webinar is sheets, and sheets are really important because they are the foundation of all of your work in Smartsheet. Everything in Smartsheet starts in a sheet. And today we're going to explore the different capabilities of a sheet, and we're going to really do that in 3 buckets. First, we're going to start by talking about sheet structure. So really understanding the critical elements of setting up a sheet and really setting it up the way that is going to enable additional functionality for your Smartsheet solution. The second part of our time today, we're going to focus on looking at your sheet and being able to determine what information is important. There's going to be several different ways to do this. So creating filters on a sheet, adding conditional formatting to color code what you're looking at and easily find the information you need, and highlight changes, meaning have Smartsheet highlight the cells for you that have recently been updated so you can keep an eye on what's new. Lastly, we're going to take a step back and really think about how do we understand what's happening in our sheet. Smartsheet is a collaborative work management platform, and that means you're going to be working with others, and others are going to be updating your sheet. So how do you understand all of those details at a higher level? Lastly, of course, we're going to look at resources available to you to learn more about these topics and suggested next steps to continue your education. With our focus on sheets today, we are actually not going to talk about collaboration, even though that is a really important element of working in a sheet. And that's because we have a whole separate webinar about collaboration. So today we'll really focus on the structure and setting up your sheet correctly. And if you'd like to learn more about collaborating, so sharing a sheet, collecting information into your sheet with a form, automation, as well as collaborating on content. So actually attaching and reviewing documents within your sheet. We're going to have a collaboration webinar coming up, and you can register for these additional topics using the links over in the resources widget to the right of our screen. We're going to get started by talking about how to get started. So whether you are brand new to Smartsheet or you are just kicking off a new process or a new program, there's 3 ways to get started. You can create a sheet from scratch, so start with a blank spreadsheet and really structure it exactly the way you need to manage your work in Smartsheet. You can actually import existing work, so a lot of the time you already have a lot of work that you might be managing in a different tool, and you can import that and continue to build out a process in Smartsheet. And what we're going to do today is you can actually use a template. And we have a variety of templates and template sets available that you can browse through or search to find one that meets your industry or your role, really the type of work that you're managing. The great thing about templates is even though we have created a solution for you that you can download, templates are customizable. So once you've downloaded it, you own the template. It is your own sheet or your own sheets and reports and dashboards, so you can continue making modifications and really making sure that you're not trying to fit your team into how this template is set up. You can customize the template to align with how your team works. For our demonstration today, we're going to be using a template set called Strategic Plan. And this is also where we're going to transition into that demo. So we will take a look at how to find and download a template or template set, and then we'll explore all these different elements of working in a sheet that we talked about during our agenda. When you're signed into Smartsheet, you can locate the Solution Center anytime by navigating to the left menu and clicking the plus button. Again, in the Solution Center, you're going to be able to search. So if you're looking to download the template set we're using today, you can simply type in the word strategic plan, or you can continue to browse based on these categories. And I actually recommend, even if something might not fit exactly the work you're doing in Smartsheet, downloading these template sets is a great way to see Smartsheet in action. So it's a great way to get inspired for how you're going to structure your own work. Once I have found the template set that I am looking to use for my work, all I have to do is click on it. I can learn a little bit about how this template set works, and of course, learn more. And each of the template sets actually have this overview and setup instructions that explain how the template set works. Once I've downloaded my template set, I can find it in my Sheets folder, and you'll see included in this template set, I actually have 4 different sheets, reports, and a dashboard. So again, today we're going to just talk about sheets, but as we progress through our webinar series, we will also explore reporting, rolling up data, as well as creating dashboards. I'm going to get started with my project plan A sheet. And one thing I will mention here is I have made several small changes in some of the details in my sheet. So you might see tasks with different dates or assigned to different people if you're following along in your own copy of this template set. No worries, this introduction is really to familiarize yourself with Smartsheet capabilities. So even though we're going to be using the strategic plan template set for our demo today, the things that we're going to learn about are going to apply to everything at Smartsheet. So if you're not planning strategic projects, this is going to still apply to all other types of work in Smartsheet. When we talk about sheet structure, there are going to be several things that are important to keep in mind as you set up your sheet. We're going to start first with our primary column. In this sheet, our primary column is the task name column, and I know that because the name of the header is bolded. The primary column is where you're going to set up your structure and really keep what I think of as the subject line of each of the rows in your sheet. The most important thing about the primary column is this is actually where you're going to also organize and set up the hierarchy. So creating what we call the children or indented rows as well as the parent rows. To create this hierarchy, all I have to do is select rows, either by selecting the cells in the primary column or selecting the row numbers. And I can come up to the top of my page and select indent. You'll see when I hover, there's also a keyboard shortcut. So as you start using Smartsheet more and more, you can just use the keyboard shortcuts to create these hierarchies. I can now collapse and expand, and you'll notice that we are several rows in, so you can create multiple levels. Anything you need to do to really organize the work that you're managing in Smartsheet, especially because likely the work you're managing is going to take up quite a bit more space, so have a lot more rows than the sheet we're using today. Moving on from our primary column, the rest of the columns in your sheet are completely flexible and customizable. You can right-click on the name of any of these columns to insert a new column left or right. And when you're inserting a new column, you'll notice that Smartsheet doesn't add the column right away because we need to know the most important thing about each column, and that is, what is the column type? Column types are super important when you're setting up your sheet because they're actually going to drive additional functionality. If you are going to be assigning work, you are going to want to add a contact list. And you can already see we have a contact list in the background here. A contact list is going to actually find a Smartsheet user to assign this work to. And later on, that's going to power some of the collaboration and automation that we look at in our collaboration webinar. In addition to contact list columns, date columns are also going to be really important because they are going to power a lot of things in Smartsheet. So by adding a date column, I have dates that I can use to automate reminders. I have a date that is going to power my Gantt chart for project management, or my calendar view, or even my calendar sync out to an external calendar. And we'll look at how to do that in just a moment. We also have drop-down columns, and drop-down columns are completely flexible, meaning I can add multiple options here. And each row, when I'm setting up a drop-down column, is going to be a separate drop-down value. Drop-down columns are also really important because they're going to power our fourth view that we'll look at, which is card view. Our next couple column types are a checkbox column, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a way to visually check a box in each row, or I can look at additional symbols. So adding some more visual information, whether I'm tracking statuses, whether I'm tracking completion. We have a variety of symbols that are going to really represent information in a way that is easy to gauge rather than reading through a lot of black and white text. The last column type that I'll mention is our auto number system column. Smartsheet is going to control the contents of this column. So you can have Smartsheet automatically number your rows. You can even capture who created a row, who modified a row, or a timestamp. So when a row was first created or when a row was last modified. And so this is a great way to know how current the data that you're working with is. To have Smartsheet add this information into your new created by column, you just have to save. Now that we are familiar with the sheet structure, so we're working with symbol columns, primary column, contact list column, we have a few drop-down columns here, some dates, and another symbol column. You see that we can actually add additional information. So anything else you're tracking, you can continue to add columns for. I want to focus on that correlation between a couple of our column types as well as the different views available to you in a Smartsheet. Coming up to the top of our page, you'll see that there's a drop-down that currently says Grid View, which means this is the spreadsheet view. As I mentioned earlier, some of these other views are powered by our date columns. So in our sheet, we have a start date and we have an end date. And this means I can toggle over to the Gantt view, which is really the traditional project management view. And the Gantt view enables me to view my tasks on a timeline, and it also allows me to define relationships in my tasks. So really how these tasks are connected, whether we should wait to start one task before we're done with the other, what order they need to go in, and so on. If this is an area that you would like to dive a little bit deeper into, we're going to focus on the Gantt view more in our project management session. So you can sign up for that one, and we'll talk about how to enable this roll-up data with the roll-up dates, how to create these relationships and enable dependencies, and really other important things that you need to know about working in a Gantt chart in Smartsheet. In addition to this Gantt chart, we also use those dates to power our calendar view. And the calendar view is the same idea. It takes those two date columns, but I'm able to tell Smartsheet whether I want to see just one date on my calendar, which is what we're working with here, or I can come up to these calendar settings in the top right and actually look at both. So I'm looking at the range between my two date columns, and we can see that visually as well. The calendar view is available within a sheet, but you have several options at the top here to actually overlay your existing Google Calendar into Smartsheet, or show the tasks in Smartsheet on your Google Calendar or on a different calendar type using the red calendar button. We'll come back to our grid view now and talk about our fourth view, which is the card view. Our drop-down column that we have in this sheet gives us the option to define the state of each of our rows, which is not started, in progress, or complete. We also have a contact list column, and we also have a health column. These columns are important because they have predefined values, And that means these columns are going to power our card view. And our card view takes every row in my sheet and actually shows it in swim lanes according to your predefined values. So our view currently is our health column, and you can see which tasks are red, yellow, green, and blue. And I can toggle this to other columns that are either a contact list, a drop-down, or a symbol. So for example, if I wanted to focus on who work was assigned to instead of the status of each of my rows, I can just toggle over to that column and clearly see tasks organized by each individual. There are remaining views here because our sheet does have a variety of those column types that I mentioned, and you might see something different than this within your own sheets outside of this template set. So as long as it's one of those 3 column types, which is a symbol, drop down, or contact list, you'll be able to see a different view within card view for each of those columns. Card view is also interactive, so we are not just looking at our card view and getting this information visually. If I am seeing that maybe I actually need to assign myself a little bit of extra work, I can simply move tasks around. This task then back in my sheet becomes assigned to me. So any changes that I make in the card view, the Gantt view, or the calendar view will all be reflected back in the grid view. The data is all the same. The only thing that is changing is the view that you're working in, because of course everyone prefers to work in different ways. Before we move on to the second part of our webinar, where I share a couple tips for really focusing on what's important, let's take a moment to review these different elements for structuring your sheet to get the most out of the Smartsheet functionality. So we started by talking about hierarchy, which is using that primary column to indent and outdent rows to provide structure and organize and focus. We looked at how to add additional columns and really the importance of column types because they are going to drive these different views we looked at, as well as automation, which we'll talk about in our collaboration webinar. And we looked at how to add system columns to have Smartsheet provide data within your sheet, as well as symbol columns to provide some visual information that can often be easier to find than just text. Lastly, we toggled across those 4 different views, which allows you to work in the same core set of data, but work in different views. And this becomes really important when you're collaborating with a variety of stakeholders. Next, we'll talk about the 3 elements to make looking at a sheet a lot more efficient because you're able to find what's important. So we'll start at the very top and look at filters. When you're working with a filter, you can create and share filters that are accessible in your sheet to anyone who accesses the sheet. So you'll see here with our template set, I already have a filter called Tasks Assigned to Me. And this is going to filter and allow me to see the tasks I started with, as well as that row that I assigned to myself using the card view. To create a filter, all I need to do is right-click on a column that I want to base my filter on. So let's say I'm going to right-click on my state column and select filter. Here I can define my criteria. So for example, let's look at all of the tasks that are complete. I can choose whether I just want to see the rows that meet my criteria or whether I want to include parent rows to have that context. And one important thing is I can name and share my filter. When you're setting up a filter, if I just left it like this, this is a filter that I can use temporarily. If I want to come back and use the filter frequently, which is a great way to have different views of your sheet, you're going to give it a name. If you want others to have access to this filter, you can select Share Filter and apply. And now anyone who visits the sheet is going to see that filter in this filter menu. Next, we're going to head over to our conditional formatting, which is a way to write rules to color code the information in your sheet. So for example, let's say I want to color code based on the health of a row. I'm going to set my condition, which is the rule. Let's say if my health column is green, I'm going to then apply a format, and I would like to simply color that row green. And I'm going to point out here that we have two different options to color. And the bottom one here is going to color all of those other views that we've worked in. So if I use the bucket, I'm working in my sheet. And if I use this taskbar, I'm going to add color to my calendar, my Gantt view, and my card view. Next, I can also tell Smartsheet, am I going to color code the entire row, or do I want to only color code a few cells? I'm actually going to keep it as the entire row. So with conditional formatting, I can add additional rules. So I can add rules to color red tasks red. I can choose to use a different column. Maybe I'd like to color code based on who a task is assigned to, or the budget, or the spend. All of that can be created with conditional formatting. Another way to provide that visual highlight on a sheet to get important information is by adding in a highlighter. A highlighter is something that you likely see in different sheets and documents, and this works a little bit differently because it's going to highlight for you any changes that have taken place during a specific time period. So this is a great way to open a sheet, really quickly gauge what's new, and get the important information you need. To review this section, when you have your sheet set up and you're starting to collaborate with others, there's 3 ways that you're going to provide a focused view and really find what's important. You can create, share, and use filters. You can create conditional formatting rules, so I can easily see with this green which of my rows are completed, and you can enable highlight changes, which is going to direct your attention to any recent updates in the sheet. Next, let's talk about how to understand all of this work. So we'll move over to the right side of the sheet and select our sheet summary button. Now, the right side of the sheet you'll see has several different options, and a lot of these we're going to talk about in our collaboration section. I want to focus on sheet summary because sheet summary is where you're able to really understand your work in several ways. If, for example, you have a project or a program, sheet summary is a great way to, 1, capture important high-level information like who is in charge of this process. Add a field for a contact in there. Is there another resource? So should we be linking out to documents? Should we be linking out to the dashboard for this project? Any helpful information about the work you're managing? And something that you see here that came with our template set is a variety of formulas. And sheet summary is a great place to add formulas that are going to keep track of some of this high-level information. So how many tasks do we have for each of our color statuses? How many tasks do we have that are assigned to members of our team? What is our spend for each phase of our project? And all of this information is available within our sheet, but it's also available to surface in reports and surface in our dashboards. With sheet summary, I can also take this information, and if I'm running multiple projects, I'm able to bring together the sheet summary information from multiple projects into one view. And we'll take a look at how to do that in that reporting session that's coming up in a few weeks. Smartsheet does support the majority of commonly used formulas. So you'll see here I have formulas that are calculating some of those metrics that I mentioned. And you can also navigate to the top of your Smartsheet page here to view the most common formulas, look at formulas by category, and reference will take you into our Learning Center to really understand formula structure. We're not going to focus on how to write a formula today because we both can and have hosted multiple webinars on those topics that are available for your reference in the Learning Center. Instead, I want to point out the availability of formulas in a single cell or column formulas. For example, in my health column, I can use the symbol dropdown to change statuses. Well, one of the most common questions that we get is, can we actually automate this? So can I have Smartsheet take a look at the dates, take a look at the state, and automatically update these different colors? You'll notice that in row 3 here, I do actually have a formula that was included with the template set that we downloaded. This formula is going to actually look at some of that information, so the date and the status, and automate the color of my row. Now, instead of having this formula in the cell and be something that can be overridden if somebody comes into my sheet and simply manually changes the color, I can right-click on the cell and convert to a column formula. This automatically applies this formula to every cell in the row, and the really great thing with column formulas is that they are not editable, which means I've created a formula, I have defined how this symbol column is going to work, and no one can come in here and override that by manually updating a symbol, not being aware there's a formula defining what the color should be. Now, as I mentioned, we've done several webinars about being successful with formulas, and Smartsheet actually has some formulas that are unique to Smartsheet. As you can see, there are some capabilities in the sheet that might not be covered with your standard formulas. In our resources section over to the right, I have linked a webinar we've previously done that is focused specifically on automating symbols like we did today with our formula and how to write those if statements, as well as becoming familiar with unique Smartsheet formulas. So if that's an area where you'd like to automate some information in your sheet, I recommend catching up on that session on demand. So now that we have looked at some of the most important elements of structuring and working in a Smartsheet, let's take a moment to review, and then we'll talk about additional resources. So again, the best way to think about these capabilities that we learned about today is really in these 3 categories. When we are talking about customizing your sheet structure, and there's a lot of room for customization, whether you are starting from scratch or using a template or template set, the most important things that you can do is create hierarchy, so children and parent relationships, to organize your work instead of having just a long list of tasks to accomplish. As you add and change columns, make sure you're selecting the right column type to get that full functionality out of your sheet. And you can work across multiple views. So depending on who you're working with or the type of work that you're doing, grid, Gantt, calendar, and card views are all available and all work with the same underlying data. With all of this work, you can use 3 capabilities to focus on what you need to know. And this includes creating filters in your sheet, enabling highlight changes to see what's new, and adding conditional formatting to color code based on values within your sheet. Lastly, use that sheet summary section in the right side of your sheet to track high-level information, links to important related content, and formulas to understand your work at a higher level. With formulas, you can include them in that sheet summary section, or you can include them within the sheet itself, so in the cells. And you can use formulas to automate a lot of the information in your sheet. Today, we specifically looked at a formula that was applied to be a column formula and make sure every row in your sheet follows the same structure. What we didn't talk about today, which is a really key and critical part of working in Smartsheet, is collaboration. And there are a lot of different elements that include sharing, forms, automation, as well as collaborating on content. Our next session that is coming up after this Sheets webinar is SmartStart collaboration. So head on over to smartsheet.com/webinars to register for this session, as well as any other sessions in our SmartStart onboarding series that you may have missed. In addition to the SmartStart onboarding series, we do have self-service learning available in the Smartsheet Learning Center, where you can find brief help videos, step-by-step instruction, and help articles about any of the Smartsheet content that you learned about today or may come across when you're working in Smartsheet. You can also visit the Solution Center anytime to find free templates for your work. And if you're looking for a deeper dive, so I know we covered a lot in our half hour today, but we do also have instructor-led, activity-based training as well as certification, all available within Smartsheet University. Lastly, if you have any specific questions, so aside from what we talked about in our Q&A today, if you have questions about something within your own sheet, our support team is available to help. I want to take a moment before we finish up today to thank everyone who was able to join us. As I mentioned at the start of our webinar, if there are any outstanding questions, we will make sure to follow up with an email response. And as always, anyone who has registered for today's session will receive a copy of the webinar recording available for you to share or review on demand. Thanks again for joining today, and I hope to see you in the coming weeks for our additional webinar topics.